I mean, God wants to tell about all the beginnings of his nation. And he takes 25% of the book to tell about one man, Joseph. And what's the one man's story? The one man's story is God is sovereign over all events and people and time to fulfill his purposes, both for his nation and for his people and individuals. Isn't that not the story of Joseph? I mean, when you ever get really discouraged, when you get a raw deal, here's a guy that thought he heard from God, probably didn't express it very well to his brothers early on, right? Had a little character training he needed to get. But here's a guy who follows God, God's hands upon him, and what he gets for being obedient and not turning away from God is sold into slavery, and it was a little bit better than getting killed. And then he's falsely accused. Then he ends up in prison. Then he's forgotten in prison. And years and years and years and years and years. Why? God was working all things together to fulfill his purposes, not only for the nation. And then the famine comes, and God orchestrated through the evil of other people to put one man in a position, second in command in the most powerful nation, the ruler of all the earth, so that he could bring his nation, this little tiny group of people, and put them in the incubator of Egypt. And in this little spiritual and physical incubator, he allows them to grow to millions to fulfill his purposes. And the way he did it was give a raw deal in prison and false accusations and hurt and pain and injustice and being forgotten and feeling like he's getting dissed and like God has totally forgotten him. But God was orchestrating and planning it in his life for his nation, for his purposes, the same way he is with you. The same way he is with you. He's the sovereign king of all. That's his story of Israel. And unless, my Chinese friends say, well, wait a second, you're using this book a lot, and I thought you were going to give me a little more information, that a little more objective and quantifiable. Turn to Daniel. Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 7. It's amazing. Do a huge study on that, or find a great commentary or a book. Here we have hundreds of years before it happens. God explains as Daniel sees things that are future, and he fasts and prays for 21 days and says, Lord, I need to understand these things. And then God gives him revelation that he specifically identifies the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Greek, and Roman empires. The next 4 major empires, what will happen, down to the point of how the Greeks would have 4 generals and break apart. I mean, it is an amazing story where God in his word, hundreds of years before it ever occurred, says, this thing that you call history looking backward is my story. And I have purposes. And I have purposes for a special group of people to make my name great. And I have purposes for all the nations. And you think you're so powerful and you think you understand everything. Well, I'll tell you what, the Babylonians are going to come and do this. And in their arrogance and pride, then I'm going to bring the Medo-Persians and they will do this. And then Alexander the Great will come and he will do this. And at the end of that time, this general and these 4, and then there will be a training and a breaking, and then the Roman Empire. And he lays it out in his word, so that even an objective, intellectual, well-educated person coming out of atheistic communism could say, if they would do the work, whoa,